Story 1. My family abandoned me because my sister, CIS, blamed me for her divorce. Years later, I get an email out of nowhere explaining everything with proof, so I ruined her life with it. Almost 7 years ago, my family cut me out of their lives and kicked me out of the house. I, 29M, was 22 at the time and wasn't financially stable enough to rent an apartment on my own. And what had happened was so sudden that I'd had no time to prepare myself for it at all, mentally or financially. The reason behind all of this was my sister. My sister Hannah, 37F, and I have never been close because of the significant age gap between us. She got married to her boyfriend Pete, 39M, of 3 years when she was 27, and they were married for 3 years. They got divorced 3 years into their marriage because Hannah had accused Pete of having an affair with one of my friends. I've been living with my parents after college since I just started working, and I wanted to save some money before I moved out. My parents were okay with that arrangement as well, but that was only until my sister announced her divorce. She just came back home one day, crying hysterically, and announced that she'd filed for divorce because her husband had been cheating on her for 6 months now. And then she went on to throw me under the bus for introducing my friend to him. My friend Emily, 28F, was trying to gain weight, and since Pete was a certified dietitian, he agreed to help her out. I had been the one to introduce her to him, and apparently, she was the one Pete had been cheating on my sister with. I was shocked that this was happening because even though Emily and I weren't close, I knew for a fact that she was a good woman and would never get with a married man. Besides, cheating was so out of character for Pete as well. He was totally smitten with Hannah and only ever had good things to say about her, so I found it incredibly hard to believe that he cheated on her. I had my doubts, but my parents believed her instantly and didn't even question anything. In spite of the fact that she never had any proof of him cheating, they just took her word for it. But I'm not going to hold it against them since they would choose their own daughter over their son-in-law regardless of who was right. What I didn't understand was why they readily kicked me out just because Hannah said so. She just stormed in one day, threw a tantrum, and somehow convinced my parents to throw me out simply because I'd been the one to introduce Emily to Pete. She accused me of ruining her marriage, and my parents agreed with her for some reason. I was devastated and tried to stop my parents, but they weren't ready to listen to me at all, and told me that if I didn't leave, then they'd forcefully kick me out. In just one day, I'd lost my family and my home, and had absolutely no idea where to go. I was literally sobbing out on the sidewalk with all my stuff for an hour or so before I was able to pull myself together and went to a friend's house for the night. I tried contacting them every single day for the next few days, but didn't have any luck. My friend was kind enough to let me live at his place until I was able to find an apartment for myself. Unfortunately, my parents had pretty much made up their minds that I was in the wrong here and I was the one responsible for the divorce. My mom and dad had actually told me that they were disgusted by what I'd done before kicking me out, which didn't even make sense because it wasn't as if I'd been the one who Pete cheated with. They'd blocked my number so I couldn't get through to them at all, and when I tried to visit them, my mom threatened to call the cops on me if I didn't leave. So after that, I finally realized that they were serious about this and actually did blame me for whatever had happened. I don't think I had any reason to be surprised since my sister always had been the favorite child. My parents had never really planned for a second child, so I ended up always getting sidelined, and while I didn't care much for it growing up, I didn't know that it would lead to something so huge. Thinking about it now, I guess I should have seen it coming, but honestly, I don't think anyone in my place could have seen something like this coming. Anyway, I even tried to figure out things for myself to make sense of it all for the next couple of weeks since Hannah and my parents had practically cut me off altogether, and I had no way to get to them. I couldn't speak to Pete either because he blocked me too, which didn't make any sense to me. I couldn't find him either because both Hannah and Pete had vacated the house they used to live in and had left to live with their respective parents instead. So I had no way to get through to anyone involved, which is why I approached my last resort to get to the truth. Emily. Like I said, Emily and I weren't really close, but I had to do what I had to do, so I just asked to meet her one day and explain the situation to her. I asked her if what Hannah had said about the affair was true, and she denied it vehemently, and I believed her, to be honest. Emily told me that she'd only ever met Pete a few times and only in a professional capacity, so there was absolutely nothing going on between them, and she had no idea why Hannah would say something so awful about her. She even told me that she'd had a steady boyfriend for a couple of years already and was planning to get hitched in a few months. 2. She even showed me pictures, and what she told me was way more convincing than whatever Hannah had said. I had no proof, but I just knew somehow that Hannah had been lying about the real reason for the divorce. But since I had no proof, I couldn't go back to my family, and I most certainly couldn't go back without it. Back then, I was pretty desperate to go back to living with my family, since I really missed them despite what they'd done to me. With time, however, I was able to get over it and move on with my life. I managed to find a place and made my job the purpose of my life so that I'd have something to distract myself with, and I also had to pay the bills, so it was a better way of coping than just sitting around and being depressed since I didn't have any other option either. I was hurting a lot, but I knew I had to go on somehow, with or without my family's support. Years passed, and now I'm doing much better in life. I've moved from my tiny apartment to a much bigger one, and even got engaged to my girlfriend of 2 years, Liza, 30F, around a week ago. And our engagement post is what ended up being a game changer for me because just a few days after that post, I received an email out of literally nowhere that not only explained the entire story of Hannah's divorce to me and gave me all the answers I needed but also had proof attached. My fiancée Liza usually only posted us on Instagram, but the picture from our engagement made it to her Facebook feed as well, where she had a wider audience. It was a public post as well, and a lot of people saw it, including my ex-brother-in-law Pete. He happened to be someone my fiancée had met at a seminar a few years back since she was a doctor, and it ended up adding him on Facebook, which is how he found me. It really is a small world, and for the first time I was glad about it. He reached out to me a few days after we posted, but instead of texting me on social media, he decided to send me an anonymous email. He explained later on that he did this just so that he wouldn't feel weird about what he was doing, since it had been several years since his divorce, and he didn't want to seem like a sore loser who still hadn't managed to move on from what happened. Besides, he'd been the one to block me in the first place, so he felt weird and conscious about getting back in touch with me about something that happened so many years back. Coming to the contents of the email I received, it had the full story and proof of what had happened 7 years ago, and I couldn't believe my eyes when I went through it. So apparently, my sister had been the one cheating on Pete and not the other way around, like she'd been telling us for so long. Not only was that a huge lie, but even more interesting was the fact that she'd been cheating on Pete with a friend of mine, just like she'd accused him. My friend Frank, 28M, was a cashier at the grocery store near Hannah's house back then, and I never would have made the connection myself since I'd literally never seen them together. I guess they'd kept it well under wraps, but not enough for Pete to not find out. And when Hannah was confronted, she told Pete that it was all my fault because she'd been cheating on Pete with a friend of mine, just like she'd accused him. My friend Frank, 28M, was a cashier at the grocery store near Hannah's house back then, and I never would have made the connection myself since I'd literally never seen them together. I guess they'd kept it well under wraps, but not enough for Pete to not find out. And when Hannah was confronted, she told Pete that it was all my fault because I'd been the one to introduce her to Frank and had even told her about how he needed her help since he was an aspiring singer, and she was a pretty good singer herself. She'd agreed to help him, and bam, they'd fallen in love before they knew it. She even said that I was in on it and had helped them keep things under wraps for so long. Obviously, all of this was a complete lie, and I hadn't even known that Frank and Hannah had something going on. He was outraged when he found out and ended up blocking my entire family, which he admits now was kind of stupid on his part, but he was so angry that he hadn't given his actions much thought. Of course, he told me all of that in person since the email itself was meant to be as impersonal as possible as he didn't want it to be traced back to him, but I did figure it out. The proof that he'd attached were a bunch of screenshots of emails between my sister and Frank where they were discussing how easy it was to fool Pete, and were full of confessions of love and plans for where they were going to meet next. There was no way she could deny any of this because she'd even signed off in the emails with her middle name, which not many people are aware of. I had her dead to rights. I figured out that it must have been Pete who'd sent me this email after I combed through Liza's Facebook friends because my gut feeling told me that this definitely had something to do with social media, and when I was finally able to find Pete in her list, I got in touch with him. We decided to meet a few days ago, and he told me that he'd found out about what Hannah had told her family from Emily, who'd met him a couple of years back. I told her to keep my side of the story a secret, and I was kicking myself for it when I realized that if I hadn't said that, she probably would have told Pete about it, and I would have been able to prove my innocence ages ago. Anyway, they'd run into each other a couple of years ago, and she'd ended up asking him about the divorce, so they got to talking, and finally, he'd also learned what Hannah had told us. He confessed that he wanted to talk to me about it and tell me the truth, but didn't because he felt weird. I swear if Pete wasn't so easily embarrassed, my life would have been a lot easier to deal with. I did forgive him, though, since I needed his help to absolutely destroy my sister, and I knew he'd be on board with it as well. Hannah had definitely been lying to my parents so she'd have financial support during her divorce, and had even thrown me under the bus for good measure because she'd known that one conversation with Emily and I'd know the truth. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that someone, especially someone who was related to me by blood, could be this selfish. I'm sure she'd never bothered to set the record straight either, and my parents had just lapped up whatever lies she'd been feeding them during her divorce. She'd known that if the truth about her being the cheater had been revealed to our parents, she would have been in big trouble, and she just couldn't risk that. Well, too bad, but it was finally out now, and I was going to use it to ruin her life just like she'd ruined mine all those years ago. I didn't know if my family lived in the same house since I hadn't visited them for 7 years, but as luck would have it, they hadn't moved. I confirmed with an old neighbor of mine before showing up and was glad to learn that Hannah was still living with them as well. That wasn't very surprising to me because Hannah had always been a couch potato and hated doing any work herself. So if she had the option of living with her aging parents and making them do all the chores for her, she'd definitely do it. Anyway, 2 days back, Pete and I just showed up without warning at their house. My mom opened the door, and we barely even gave her any time to register what was happening before we walked in. My dad and Hannah were also present in the living room, and we were one happy family again. But not for long since their expressions soured just as soon as we entered. My dad began to threaten us immediately and said that he'd call the cops if we didn't get the hell out of his house, and I shot right back saying that he was free to do whatever he wanted to, but only after he'd read the documents that we were about to show them. My parents looked incredibly confused, but Hannah looked like she was going to barf and excused herself so that she could go to her room. I thought she was trying to escape, but there was no point in doing so anyway. Pete went on to show the divorce documents and the screenshots of Hannah and Frank's emails while I explained the real story. Pete also told my parents how Hannah had to give up our family heirloom, my grandmother's diamond ring, in the settlement because she couldn't afford to pay him the money since she's a high school teacher, so she had to sell the ring instead. My parents were already horrified by what we told them, and that was just the cherry on top. We watched the drama unfold as my dad demanded an explanation from Hannah for all that had happened. And when she still tried to lie and cover up the truth despite all the evidence against her, my dad promptly kicked her out. He packed her stuff for her and handed over the bags to her, then told us all to get the hell out of their house. I didn't need to be told twice and left with Pete while my sister begged and pleaded with my parents to let her back in, just like I had all those years ago. This was karma at its best, and I couldn't be happier about it. It's been a couple of days since then, and my sister showed up at my place a few hours ago, demanding that I make things right with my parents immediately. I didn't even know how she found me, but I told her that I didn't owe her anything anymore. She'd ruined my life once, so I repaid her the favor, and we were now fair and square. I guess she really had no pride left because as soon as I said that, she started sobbing and accusing me of being a monster. I didn't care much for her drama, though, and shut the door while she continued to sob relentlessly. I just put my headphones on and listened to music while Liza, my fiancée, worked in her study so neither of us would be disturbed. After a while, Hannah finally left us alone, but she left a message with a marker on my door to remind me that I was nothing but a revengeful monster. I don't see anything wrong with what I did, very frankly, and don't feel sorry in the least, but Hannah seems pretty convinced that I'm the villain here somehow. I just did to her what she'd done to me several years ago, except that I told the truth while she did nothing except lie and throw me under the bus. Update 1. So Hannah has still been bothering me even though a week has passed since she got kicked out. I had to threaten her with the fear of cops when she called me for the 14th time today, and only then did she stop. I don't even know how she managed to find my phone number and address, but I'm least interested in that right now. Hannah's trying to make me feel sympathetic towards her because I guess a school teacher's salary isn't enough for her to live on. But I don't think that's true, and she's just upset that she has to look for a place and pay for her own rent, electricity, and groceries now that our parents have kicked her out, so I don't feel too sorry for her. And in case you guys were wondering, yes, I did block her number several times, but I guess she's making her friends add me to conference calls, so there's no point. As for my parents, they're just as bad if not worse than Hannah. They found me on Facebook and saw the post about my engagement as well. So now they want to be part of my life once more and even expressed their desire to attend my wedding. They haven't apologized yet, but for some reason, they expect me to just invite them to my wedding, which is supposed to be a really important day for me. I don't understand where these people find the guts to say crap like this, but at least I'm not responding to any of it. Liza and I have had a field day reading their texts because there's really just no way they're for real right now. It's all just really sad for them. Update 2. Hannah showed up at my house yet again after I threatened to report her for harassment yesterday. I was about to leave for work, but she stopped me by throwing herself across the hood of my car and refused to budge until I spoke to her. It was pretty exasperating, and I ended up actually calling the police this time. They took her away while she screamed and cried and tried her best to show me as the bad guy here. But unfortunately, nobody was buying her sad girl act. It took some time to press charges against her, but as soon as I got it done, I left for work because I didn't want to let this little incident ruin my day. I was sure my parents would bail her out anyway since she was their favorite, and I turned out to be right as well. My parents, after bailing her out, sent me a lengthy text about how I was being way too harsh on them for an honest mistake that they'd made almost a decade ago. It was hilarious because nothing about what my sister and parents had put me through was either honest or even a mistake. They knew what they were doing and were definitely aware of how cruel they were, but that didn't stop them from throwing me out onto the street despite knowing that I had no other place to go. So now that I can do the same to them, I don't see a reason to be forgiving and kind. I texted my parents back saying that they'd lost any right to tell me what I could and couldn't do 7 years ago, so they'd better stop deluding themselves. I haven't blocked them yet since I haven't had the time to check my messages, but I will soon hopefully. Then I'll be rid of this entire family for good. Update 3. I just got back home from work and checked my socials only to see that my parents had yet again sent me another long message. Liza and I went through it together, and I swear this was the funniest thing I've ever read. I guess the poor folks don't even know that I'm not even hurt by anything they say or do now. I'm just laughing at how delusional and pathetic they are. Apparently, they still believe that we're family, and told me that they've taken Hannah back in with them and have decided that both their kids deserve a second chance. As if I'd ever been in the wrong at all. So while they'd taken my sister back in, they also expected me and Liza to come to their house sometime soon for dinner, and so we could sort out our differences in a civilized manner before the wedding. Bold of them to assume that I'd even want them at my wedding in the first place. We had a good laugh about their stupid message, and after that, I wrote right back saying that I wasn't interested in the slightest in anything that they'd invited us to and was just fine living away from them like I had for these past 7 years. They'd shown me that I was better off without them, and I was forever going to be thankful for that. I didn't need them at all anymore, and neither did I want their so-called forgiveness. So they could peacefully continue to play happy family with my sister like they had been so far. With that last text, I blocked them once and for all because I didn't even want the laughs anymore. I was done and out. I'm sure they'll try to get back in touch with me one way or another soon, but too bad for them. I'm not having it anymore. Liza is the only family I need now, and I'm happy with just her. My parents and my sister have unfortunately never been able to look beyond themselves, and I highly doubt that they ever will. So the next time they get in touch with me, they'll be speaking to my lawyer as well, and that's a promise. Now on to the next story. Story 2. A few years ago, my family faced one of the toughest times we could imagine as we lost our father to cancer. Before he married our mom, Dad had a life filled with incredible adventures. He was part of the crew for some famous rock bands known for their big hair and loud music during his early 20s. He lived life on the road, traveling from city to city with these bands, and he had his share of wild experiences. Dad often told us stories from those days, filled with concerts, late-night parties, and endless travels. He had a sense of humor about it all, frequently making jokes about how chaotic his life was back then. Sometimes he'd laugh and say he wouldn't be shocked if we had a half-brother or half-sister out there somewhere. According to him, there were many things from those days that he simply couldn't remember. But beneath his laughter, there was a hint of worry. It seemed like the idea that he might have another child out there whom he never met or helped raise actually bothered him a lot more than he let on. Seeing this hidden concern, my siblings and I decided to do something about it. We thought that taking a DNA test might shed light on any unknown aspects of our dad's past. We didn't expect much, maybe discovering some distant relatives at most. For years, that's exactly what happened, nothing beyond a few distant cousins. However, everything changed dramatically when Dad's health took a turn for the worse, and he had to enter hospice care around 6 months before he passed away. We received a notification from the DNA testing service. It was a match, but not with a distant cousin this time. It was a half-sister, and she was almost a decade older than me. This was a big deal. The timeline of her birth perfectly matched the period when our dad was touring incessantly with those rock bands. Before responding to her, we felt it was important to discuss it with Dad first, especially considering his frail condition. He was extremely weak and sick, but when we mentioned that we might have found his other daughter, the news hit him hard. He broke down crying, something we hadn't seen him do very often. Through his tears, he told us that this was exactly what he had always feared the most, having a child out there that he hadn't been there for, that he hadn't supported. He expressed a strong desire to talk to her as soon as he could. He wanted to make up for lost time, at least in whatever way he was capable of in the days he had left. When we connected with our newly discovered half-sister, things quickly took a turn for the worse. After sharing our dad's number and explaining his serious health condition, as well as the fact that he was unaware of her existence until recently, her response was far from understanding. Instead, she began to bombard him with phone calls, often filled with anger and accusations. She would scream questions at him, asking why he left her and her mother, why he never searched for her, and calling him irresponsible. We stood by, feeling helpless as we listened to these painful exchanges. We even urged him to hang up, but he refused. He believed that listening to her, absorbing her pain and anger, was the last thing he could offer her in his final days. After our dad passed away, the tension escalated when we informed her of his death. Her immediate reaction was to inquire about her inheritance. I was taken aback by her bluntness. His medical bills had depleted nearly all his savings, and after paying for his funeral, we were left with just $11,000. I explained to her that there was hardly anything left, and what little was left was meant to be split among my siblings and me. I also expressed to her how deeply hurt I was by the way she treated our father during his last days. I told her I couldn't forgive her for adding stress to his final moments, and I pointed out that it wasn't entirely his fault she grew up without him. Her mother also played a role in the situation. My mom and sisters think I'm being too harsh. They say I should try to understand how she feels about growing up without a father and suggest that I should just give her the remaining money, considering it isn't a large sum and her life hasn't been easy. However, despite their arguments, I find myself unable to move past her actions. Our dad appointed me to manage his estate, and I feel a strong responsibility to honor his last days, which were overshadowed by turmoil and regret due to those distressing calls. It's a tough position to be in, balancing fairness, grief, and unresolved family tensions. Now for some comments. Not the asshole. The fact that the first concern she had when he passed was money? He didn't know of her existence, and I won't say he's not to blame, but it's something her mother could have, mentioned to him years ago. She directed all of her anger and frustration to the wrong person, and honestly, EFF empathy after that. Sorry for your loss, and please stick with your gut on this. Not the asshole. Not your responsibility. She's rude, and has no empathy. He clearly had worry for this. He had regret. I'd say if she had some compassion, showed some sort of love or understanding, and didn't demand money from a dead man she doesn't know at all, then there could be some type of care for her, sort of. Not really. Not the asshole. I mean, if your father had wanted her to have something, he would have added her to the estate. He was talking to her, so it sounded like he was of sound mind. If he had wanted to, he wouldn't have given her any money. Stop taking her calls? It doesn't sound like she wants to get to know you anyway. I get it. She's angry, but that's not your burden to bear. Now on to the next story. Story 3. My wife informed me at her sister's wedding that she had slept with the best man. The time frame is important here. We have been married for 3 years. We were together as a couple for 2 years before that, so we've been together for about 5 years. 2 weekends ago, her sister got married, and of course, my wife was in the wedding party. So as you would expect, she spent the 2 weeks prior to the wedding helping her sister get everything ready. No big deal at all. She kept me informed, and I knew this was going to happen. She took that Wednesday to Friday off of work to help her and, in fact, stayed with her for 3 days. I certainly know her sister, but I barely know the guy who is now my brother-in-law. In fact, I only met him a few times, but he seems nice enough. I show up Saturday morning a few hours before the ceremony in hopes of stealing just a few minutes to see her, not wanting to intrude on the day since I know she is busy, but I hadn't seen her since Tuesday. She sees me outside of her parents' house and sends her brother out to tell me that she will come out and see me at the car, which I thought was odd, but whatever. She finally comes out and sits in the seat next to me and gives me a kiss, but instead of acting happy to see me or whatever, she tells me that she has to talk to me, and she doesn't want it to ruin her sister's day. She informs me that at the reception, if I still want to go, I might hear some things about the best man and her, and she didn't want it to be awkward or weird. I just kind of sat there stunned. She said that about 4 years ago she had a fling with him and then it didn't mean anything, but she was aware that by nature I'm somewhat jealous, and she wanted me to know in advance so that if I heard something I wouldn't be surprised. Again, I just kind of sat there. This was not how I thought my morning would go. But I told her I appreciated knowing it and that it certainly wasn't a big deal now. She went back in the house, and I went to eat lunch and decided to meet her at the church. As I'm eating and reading my phone, it dawns on me. She said she had a fling with him 4 years ago, and we've been together 5. My first reaction was to blow it off and think that she just told me the wrong time. But the more I thought about it, the more I started to remember about a year and a half of us being together. She had a phase where she was really sketchy about her behavior, wasn't available when she normally was, and went on 2 weekend camping trips that were with friends from work. Of course, I'm a little knotted up over this, but I know I have a long day ahead of me. I go to the wedding and sit there watching everything. After the wedding, they have a line that you walk by and congratulate the bride and groom, and the wedding party is standing in line as well. My wife is standing with some other guy I don't know at all, but the best man was there, and I just went down the line and acted like no big deal. Get to the reception, and it takes forever for them to come because of photos. She finally gets there and sits with me. I decided not to say anything as I didn't want to distract from the day, but instead of just letting it go, she then tells me that each of the groomsmen and bridesmaids are going to dance and that she is going to be dancing with him. I ask why when she was not his partner for the party, and she said that the maid of honor and her partner were actually married and wanted to dance with each other. At this point, I'm a little more than perturbed, but I try and not let it show. Thankfully, I was smart enough to not drink because I freely admit I'm an angry drunk, so I know when not to even partake. She talks to everyone around her, and then the dance comes and he comes over and extends his arm and she gets up. I try not to watch and, in fact, make it a point not to. She comes back with him in tow, and they are joking like the best of friends. She decides that it would be a good idea to introduce us, and while I didn't say F off like I wanted, my greeting to him was probably less than cordial, but it did not deter him from sitting and talking with her for a few minutes. The more they sat and talked and reminisced about old times and places, the madder I got. Eventually, I got up and went to the bathroom, and when I came back, he was gone. She decided to tell me that she thought I was rude, which was not what I wanted to hear at the moment. I told her that this wasn't the time or place to talk about it, but rest assured, we would talk later. She sat there and then said that she was going to change clothes, and as soon as she got back, she was telling her sister that we were leaving because I had ruined her day, but she didn't want me to ruin her sister's day as well. I told her that I was perfectly capable of not being a bother to her or her sister the rest of the day, and that I did not want to be the cause of any drama, so I would prefer to just stay. She went and changed clothes and then came back all in a huff. Now understand, I have not said a word to her. I even shook the other guy's hand. I guess I just looked miserable, so that is what she was basing this off of. She was adamant about not staying, and so I said that if she really wanted to go, we could go, but if she would rather stay, I would be happy to stay, or she would like since I came in my own car, I would leave so she could stay. She at first said that we should stay, but then said if I couldn't act any better, I should leave. I asked how I was acting, and she said it was obvious I was trying to be like a silverback gorilla wanting to fight. I didn't know whether to laugh in her face or be offended. I went back in and sat down while she mingled with the other guests. I talked with her brother for a while, but then ultimately ended up back at our table talking with her grandma. We leave at the same time, and I arrived home just before she did. I was sitting in the living room waiting on her when she came in, and I did not beat around the bush. I simply asked her to retell me the story about this other guy, and she said it word for word like before. After sitting and looking at her for a time, I just said, "Are you sure about the time frame?" And she said she was. I then reminded her that we had been together for 5 years, so this fling was well over a year into our being together. What happened next I can't really put into words. Instead of being flustered or denying or anything, she simply said, "I know." So I asked her to explain, and she tells me that they worked together, and that it was just a physical thing, and she felt like we weren't in a great place at the time, and that she never had any feelings for him and never had any real intentions of leaving me. She just was having some fun for a few weekends. She said that it was probably a mistake on her part to tell me now, but she didn't want me to get blindsided. I did not take this the way she thought I would, I guess. We had a very large argument, and it ended when she told me I was being a child about all of this, that we were married and this happened way before that, and our life together now has nothing to do with him or that time. Well, 2 things. 1, I adamantly disagree about this having no bearing on us. She cheated on me, and doesn't even have the goddamn decency to feel guilty about it. 2, I hate being told I am childish when I get upset over something. It pisses me off to no end because that is her way of acting superior to me. I told her I needed time to think, and she told me there was nothing to think about. We loved each other, and this didn't change anything. That was 2 weeks ago, and I still am not over it. She has been trying the past few days to get me to talk to her, but I admit that for whatever reason, I'm not viewing her the same as I did before this. Part of me is like, that this is stupid, it happened a few years ago, and we are married now, and there hasn't been any problems at all. But then part of me is like, I just found out she cheated on me, and it hurts like a mother trucker. And what makes it worse is that instead of trying to understand how I feel, she is trying to guilt me into just not even thinking about it. Update. The maid of honor, not my wife, was married to the groom. There have been developments, but all they have done is make it harder for me to decide. Last week I was mostly angry. Then, as the weekend progressed, I became mostly sad. I want to be able to hate her and flip that switch that tells me I'm being walked on and I'm a sucker, but it's just very hard for me to do that because I still love her, and this is ripping me apart. Here is what has happened of any consequence. She finally came to the realization that I was not going to just get over this. This then brought her to the realization that I might want out of the marriage. This then brought on a near nervous breakdown from her. Someone from the first post stated that she would try and manipulate me like that, and believe me, I was taking those words to heart when I thought she was having crocodile tears. But as soon became apparent to me, she wasn't acting or faking. She was having a legitimate panic attack. This led to an ER visit, and that led to an overnight stay in the hospital, and then to new medications and a scheduled follow-up with her doctor for later next week. This brought her family into it, and that in turn led to long conversations all the way around. When we got home with her family in tow, I asked what she wanted to do since there was a house full of people, and she said she wanted to be with her mom for a while. That was fine with me as I had no desire to hang around all day with her dad or sister, so I said I was going to go finish up something at work and would be home later. 2 hours after I get there, I get a text from her begging me to please come home and that she really needs me to talk with her. So I finish up what I was doing and head home. I am greeted on my own front porch by her dad, who asks if he can talk to me for a minute. My anger level was already somewhat high, but I was ready to go to war if she had dumped a sack of lies on me with her dad. I mean, it's not like he and I are best friends and crap, but I've never had a bad moment with him, so I really wasn't going to be happy about being the bastard who broke his baby's heart. We sat on our deck chairs, and he floored me with his opening salvo. I was expecting to hear anything but what he said. He said that she told them what had happened and that he wanted to apologize to me because he said that he felt like he did a really bad job as a parent, and that this mindset that she had was really a creation of her mother's and his wife's, and that while he loved both of them, he said they were wrong, and he had told his wife years ago that telling the girls that whatever happens before marriage doesn't count was a horrible idea and value system to install in them. He then said that he wasn't there to stand up for what his daughter did, but he just wanted me to be aware that what she was saying and how she was acting was simply because she honestly believed that being married was an entirely different life and that her mom and dad had romanticized marriage to the point that she wasn't understanding real life. Basically, he was kind of throwing his wife under the bus. But again, this is not what I was expecting at all. We shook hands, and he said that no matter what I decided, he still thought very highly of me, which honestly made me feel really good for that moment. I then went inside, and my wife is curled up in a ball on her mom's lap, and you can tell she has been crying the entire time I've been gone. Mom gets up and comes and hugs me and tells me she is sorry, and that she loves me, and she is praying that we can work this out. My wife is laid out on the couch at this point. Her mom and dad leave, and she sits there looking at me and crying. Okay, this is where I'm gonna piss off everybody and just tell you that I couldn't take it. I went to her and we hugged for a long time, with her telling me over and over how sorry she was. Hey, I know it was the weak thing to do, but again, I have to say in my defense that just before this incident occurred, I loved her with all of my heart and would have done anything to not see her in pain. Whatever she had done, I still didn't want to see her like that. Look, it's very possible that she was putting on an Oscar-worthy acting job, but I don't honestly think so. She really seemed broken at that point in time. After a while, when she calmed down, I asked her what she wanted me to come home and talk about, and she said she wanted to get everything out in the open so I didn't feel like I was being lied to or manipulated, so she wanted me to ask her questions. And I wish I had written down a list, but I came up with a few off the top of my head. She was brutally honest with me, and some of the questions I asked I probably shouldn't have because now the mental image is stuck in there, but honestly, it was there anyway. I just now have confirmation. First, I asked for dates or, at the very least, approximate dates. I didn't tell her about the engagement concern I had because I didn't want her to change stories, and she remembered exactly when they occurred. Fortunately, this happened a little earlier in our relationship than she told me initially, and so we were not engaged when this happened. I can't tell you what a relief that was because I became physically ill when I thought about that when someone said it in my last post. Second, I asked how many times she went overboard with this because instead of just telling me how many different dates, she decided to tell me how many times there was intimacy. She wasn't doing it to be mean. She honestly thought that is what I wanted to know. This part of the conversation did not help me any at all and, in fact, almost broke me down. In truth, it wasn't that often, and in fact, there were really only 3 different days that happened on, but there were several times during those 3 days. Then came the hard part: why did she do it? Okay, again, I'm not the most manly of men, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but I couldn't get this out without starting to cry. I asked, why wasn't I good enough? Why him? Why did she not just leave me? It was her turn to hold me because at this point, everything came rushing at me, her telling me having to watch them laugh with each other, her now telling me how many times they did it and where they did it. She talked during this, but to this moment, I have no idea what she said. I was too upset, and honestly, nothing she was going to say was going to make a bit of difference anyway. But after I composed myself, I simply told her that the betrayal was horrible, but honestly, her response to me when I found out was just as bad if not worse. She agreed with me and apologized for calling me immature. She said that she honestly believed that it wouldn't matter to me now because we were married. When she said this, my blood started to boil again. I started to say something about it, but she jumped in and said that after talking with her parents, she now sees that this was very wrong of her, and that cheating is cheating, but she still feels like that our happiness that we have shared since being married should count for something. I then replied that I kind of felt like that happiness was built on a lie. This led to another breakdown on her part and almost another ER visit, but between Ativan and having her breathe into a paper sack, we got her calmed down. I let her sleep the rest of the night, feeling like emotionally we were both tired, but come Sunday we were talking again. By this time, I wasn't as sympathetic as I'd been when we got home from the ER. I told her that I thought her introducing him to me was crappy, me having to watch her dance with him was extra crappy, and the fact that she only told me because she was going to get caught was an elite level of crappy, which then I demanded to know why did she think I would find out and how many of the people at the wedding knew besides me. Well, obviously the guy knew, but then his best friend in the world also knew. Did I mention that dude is now my brother-in-law? Which then led to her sister finding out, and she was afraid her sister was going to be the one to tell me. I asked how often she sees this guy, and she said that the wedding is the first time she has seen him in 3 years. Then I lost my crap and asked her if she left him during any of the lead up to the wedding. She got all pissy about it, acting like she wouldn't F anyone because she was married, and I just lost my cool and had to leave for a while because once again, I felt like she was living on Married Planet or some such crap in the world. There is a different place than for the rest of us. I finally got cooled off enough to come home and try and be civil about things. She finally asked me what she could do to help me get past all of this, which may not sound like much, but it was the first time she offered to help me really, so it was at least a nice gesture. I told her I wasn't sure what she could do or if there was anything either of us could do and that I may never get over this. She said that she wanted to help because she didn't want to see me in pain, and that over the years she hopes I'll be able to judge her based on who she is now. She would do anything I wanted to work this out. She also wanted to be sure that I knew that she has been 100% faithful since we've been married and would never cheat on her vows. I sarcastically thanked her, which I admit wasn't the most mature thing to do. I then asked for a moratorium from further talks till at least Wednesday. I have 2 projects I have to get done, and honestly, I'm just exhausted and know I have no clue what I want to do. I shift between periods of red-hot anger where I want to kick her out and then periods of deep emotional turmoil where I want to just forget this and move forward with her. Yes, I know this is not what anyone wanted to hear, and no, I'm not proud to type it, but it is what it is at the moment. Now on to the next story. Story 4. I'm about to turn 18 in a few months, and things have taken a surprising turn at home. Let me set the stage for you. I live in a house that belonged to my biological dad. He passed away when I was only 6 years old. Now, my dad and my mom weren't married, but when he died, he left the house to me, so my mom and I have been living here ever since. A couple of years after my dad passed, my mom started dating again, and that's when my stepdad came into the picture. They got married and he moved in with us. It seemed like everything was going okay until recently. You see, for the longest time, my stepdad was under the impression that the house belonged to my mom. No biggie, right? Except this misunderstanding led to a pretty awkward conversation just the other day. As my 18th birthday approached, my stepdad sat me down for a serious talk. He casually mentioned that once I was 18, I should start paying rent if I wanted to continue living here. It was a bit of a shock. I mean, paying rent in my own house? That sounded weird, so I corrected him, explaining that the house actually belonged to me as it was left to me by my dad. He literally laughed. He thought I was joking. I couldn't believe he didn't know, so I had to clear things up. I talked to my mom about it, and she confirmed she had never actually told him that the house was mine. When he finally realized I was serious, the atmosphere changed. He was clearly embarrassed but tried to justify his initial request by saying he thought my mom owned the house. The next day, things felt a bit tense at breakfast. I decided to address the elephant in the room. I told them both that since the house was indeed mine, the fair thing would be for them to start paying rent if they planned to stay after I turned 18. I wanted to turn the tables and see how he'd react, given his previous stance on my independence. My stepdad was taken aback. He argued that this was unfair and a sudden change to drop on them without warning. He said it was harsh and that you don't treat family like that. It was ironic, considering he had no problem dropping the rent bomb on me just the day before. He tried to defend his point by saying that his initial idea was meant to help me learn financial responsibility and prepare for adult life, but I shot back, asking how it was any different when he lived here without contributing financially. What does that teach him? I asked. The argument got pretty heated. He accused me of being spiteful and trying to get back at him. He ended the conversation by calling me out of line and walked away. My mom stayed quiet during most of the argument, but later, she told me she thought I was being too hard on him. She agreed that he shouldn't have asked me to pay rent, but she felt my reaction was pushing the family toward a split. Despite the blow-up, life went on as usual, but with an unspoken tension in the air. Over the next few weeks, we all kind of danced around the topic. I spent a lot of time thinking about family dynamics and the concept of home. It wasn't just about rent. It was about respect and understanding, about acknowledging each other's positions and feelings. I decided to have another conversation with my stepdad. This time, I approached it differently. I explained that I wasn't trying to kick them out or act spiteful. I wanted us to act like a family that supports each other, not one that takes advantage. I suggested maybe we could work out a system where they help with some bills or maintenance costs instead of traditional rent. It would be a way for all of us to contribute to our home and help maintain it. This conversation went a bit better. My stepdad seemed to understand where I was coming from, and we agreed to sit down with my mom and discuss a fair solution. It was important to me that we all felt like we were being treated fairly and that home remained a place where we all wanted to be. Looking back, I learned a lot about handling difficult conversations and standing up for myself. I also saw the importance of clear communication and respect in keeping a family together, even when things get tricky. It was a big moment for me, stepping into adulthood, not just in age but in understanding and managing real-life situations. Am I the asshole here? Now for some comments. Not the asshole. Charge him rent. It's not spiteful. That's what adults do. They either buy homes or pay rent for the places they live. He doesn't think you should be allowed to live rent-free when he thought your mother owned the house, but he thinks he should be allowed to live rent-free? Tell him to cough up or leave. Edited to add. By the way, he told you that you have to pay rent in a house that he doesn't even own. Even if your mother did own the house, any rental agreement should have come from your mother, not him. You are not his child. He has no business parenting you, even if he had the best of intentions. And when he tells you he was only doing it to prepare you for life and adult responsibilities, I call BS. If that's the way he truly felt, then he would have gone through your mother since she's related to you, and he thought it was her house. It wouldn't surprise me to learn that he was hoping that you'd pay him rent, lining his pockets with free money, collecting rent on a house that isn't even his. It's unfair because it's a sudden change? Gee, it was perfectly fine when the sudden change was happening to you. Not the asshole. He needs to act like an adult and pay his own way in life. Get a rental contract and make them sign it or start the eviction process. You know that he would 100% make you pay up or get out. Not the asshole. Oh, when the shoe is on the other foot, your stepdad is all about taking care of family? Why wouldn't your mom tell him at some point you would want to either have this as your home or sell it or rent it out for income? Did she really believe that she and him would just continue to live there forever? I would stand firm and draw up a lease that would begin in 30 days. This is your house, and honestly, I don't believe that your mom had any intention of ever letting this be your home. Now that he knows it's yours, he sounds like he would try to push you around. Now on to the next story. Story 5. So I'm a 40-year-old mom with a wonderful 15-year-old daughter named Amy. I've been raising her on my own for the most part. A few years back, I shared with everyone that I'm gay, and just last year, I married Jenna, who's 42. Jenna brought a new addition to our family, her daughter Nora, who's 13. We've all been living together under one roof, and I have full custody of Amy. It was a bit of an adjustment at first for Amy to get used to the idea of having another mom around, but now they're doing great together. Our household became even more lively because Amy and Nora's birthdays are super close to each other, only separated by a couple of days. Considering that, and knowing that Nora has been a bit shy and has had some trouble making friends since she moved in with us, we thought it would be a fantastic idea to throw a joint birthday party for them. It seemed like the perfect way to help Nora feel more integrated and celebrated in our new family setup. Because most of my relatives live abroad, they tend to send gifts ahead of time. This year, they sent a big bag full of gifts about a week before the party. There were at least 20 gifts in there, all wrapped up and ready to make the birthday girl smile. The party itself was a hit, lots of fun, laughter, and cake. After the guests left and it was just our little family, Jenna started to hand out the gifts. She pulled out gift after gift from the bag, and we noticed they were all for Amy. After about 12 gifts, I started to feel a bit uneasy. We reached into the bag again and found that there was only one left, and it was for Nora. Nora, trying to stay upbeat, opened her gift from my parents. It was a $15 tumbler from Walmart. You could see her trying to hide her disappointment. It wasn't about the price, but the thought behind it. Amy, on the other hand, had received an array of high-end gift cards, each worth well over $100. A brand new limited edition smartphone, some really cool gadgets, fancy designer clothes, and a bunch of heartfelt birthday cards. Seeing the stark difference in how the gifts were distributed really got to me. I couldn't help feeling that my family hadn't considered Nora equally, and it seemed unfair, especially seeing her try to brush it off but clearly feeling left out. That night, fueled by a mix of disappointment and mama bear instinct, I took to the family chat. I called out my siblings, my parents, and extended family members for not thinking of Nora, and I expressed my frustration about the casualness of the gifts Nora received compared to lavish ones. I wanted to make sure everyone understood that Nora is just as much a part of our family as Amy, and it's important that she feels valued and included, especially on occasions like her birthday. After the party, when I confronted my family about the unequal gift-giving, they brushed off my concerns. They argued that it wasn't their responsibility to buy gifts for Nora since she wasn't directly related to them, and they felt that Amy deserved her gifts because she was their blood relative. They also mentioned that since I hadn't thrown a separate party for Amy, it was my issue to deal with the dynamics between Jenna and Nora, not theirs. Seeing Nora feel left out wasn't new, unfortunately. This wasn't the first time she'd been overlooked by my family, which made the whole situation even more painful for her. Wanting to smooth things over, I turned to Amy that night. I asked if she might share just a few of her many gifts with Nora. Not everything, just some of the gift cards and a couple of new clothes. To my surprise, Amy was really upset by the suggestion. She had always been about sharing before, and although she and Nora weren't the closest of friends, they generally got along fine. But when I asked her to share, Amy broke down crying. She confessed that she had never wanted a joint birthday party in the first place. She felt like I was constantly making her share everything with Nora, from their room to parties to sleepovers. If only one of them was invited somewhere, I'd insist neither go unless both were included. Amy expressed that she wanted something of her own, especially her birthday gifts, which she felt were the one thing that could be just hers. In response, I told her off for being selfish and grounded her. I even took a couple of her presents and offered them to Nora, hoping it would show some fairness. However, Nora refused them, not wanting to cause more trouble with Amy or feel like she was accepting pity gifts. Since then, Amy has been pretty distant and cold toward all of us. I really just wanted to bring my daughters closer together with the joint party and make sure they both felt equally loved and included. But it seems like it backfired, and now I'm not sure how to fix the tension in our family. Am I the asshole? Clarification. Jenna and I bought gifts for the girls. Their own tablets as well as gifts from their friends. Nora also received gifts from her extended family, but they sent gifts for Amy as well. Now for some comments. Yes, you are the asshole. You're basically asking your daughter to share her complete identity with Nora, her room, her stuff, her family, her friends, her birthday party, the parties she goes to, and sleepovers. Is there anything really hers? This can't be good for her development. She needs to be her own person. Now on to the next story. Story 6. I'm the owner of a business where 15 people work. I prefer not to share what kind of business it is, but despite some tough times, it's doing pretty well. I have 3 kids, 24, 22, and 21 years old from my first marriage. I also have a stepson named Josh who is 18 years old. When I mention stepson, I just mean that Josh is my wife's son from before I met her. But to me, he's just like my own son. Back when my first 3 kids were younger, I had a rule. If they ever wanted to work at my business, I would set up a real job interview for them. They didn't know that I planned to hire them regardless of how the interview went. I wanted them to have the experience of a job interview because it's good practice. They'd learn what it's like and feel more prepared for the future in case they wanted to try different careers. 2 of my kids liked the idea and still work with me today. 8 years ago, I met the woman who would become my current wife. She introduced me to her son Josh about a year after we met. Before she let me meet Josh, she was really clear about wanting to know what role he'd have in my life. I promised her that I would treat him just like my own child. We got married a year later, and from that day, Josh started calling me Dad. He's never known his biological father, who left because he didn't want children. So for Josh to call me Dad is something I consider a great honor. My eldest 3 kids have welcomed him as their brother from the start. They include him in everything they do, like going on trips, watching movies, or just hanging out at home. He's 100% part of our family, and everyone treats him like he's always been there. This setup has helped us build a strong, united family where everyone supports each other no matter what. It's been great seeing all of them grow up, make decisions together, and become close as siblings. After my wife and I got married, I offered the same opportunity to Josh that I had given to my other kids. I told him that if he ever wanted to work at my business, I would set up a job interview for him just like I did for his siblings. Recently, Josh finished his last year of high school and was unsure about whether to go to university or start working. After thinking it over during the summer holidays, which just started, he decided that university wasn't the right path for him right now and that he'd rather get a job. So he came to me and asked if I could arrange a job interview for him at my company. I happily agreed. What I haven't told him yet is that he's going to get the job no matter how the interview goes. I think it's important for him to go through the process of an interview to gain some experience and confidence. However, when I discussed this plan with my wife, she was really upset. She felt that by making Josh go through an interview, I wasn't treating him the same way as my biological kids, even though this was exactly what I had done for them. I explained to her that Josh already has the job, but I believed that having an interview experience would be beneficial for him, just as it was for his siblings. My wife thinks that since Josh is the youngest, maybe it would be fairer to just give him the job without an interview, especially since he's shown interest and initiative by asking for it. She's been quite unhappy with me for the past couple of days because of this disagreement. I'm trying to balance being fair to all my children while also preparing them for the real world, and it's tricky when you're blending a family with different expectations and perspectives. I hope we can resolve this soon, as it's important for all of us to be on the same page and support each other. Now for some comments. Not the asshole. You are being extremely reasonable. It's honestly a bit alarming that she would have that reaction and say that you don't treat him like your son. Despite 8 years of doing just that, over a job interview he isn't bothered by it. You've done it for all your kids. Maybe she has something else bothering her because it is hard to justify her response here. Not the asshole. You are quite literally treating your stepson the way you treated your biological children, and being the youngest doesn't entitle him to special privileges. I genuinely don't see why your wife is upset. Not the asshole at all. He is being given a job, and you're helping him get some real-life experience. He's getting the exact same treatment that your other kids received. Your wife's behavior is just plain weird here. Now on to the next story. Story 7. So my husband Finn, we're a couple and we have very different salaries right now. Finn was making good money before, like $44,000 a month, but he wanted to go back to school to get a master's degree, which is awesome. But now he makes way less because the scholarship doesn't pay much. He gets about $2,300, but after he pays for all his school stuff, he's only left with about $1,500 each month. Now I make more money, about $7,000 a month, so I pretty much take care of 90% of our expenses. We keep all our money together in joint accounts, and I'm all for supporting him while he gets his master's because I think it's super important for his future. So, Finn's childhood buddy Marcus was getting married. Finn was not just a guest, he was the best man, which is a big deal. He had to organize the bachelor party before the wedding. Even though all the friends who were supposed to help promised to chip in for the party costs, many didn't actually pay up. They just ignored Finn's messages about the money, leaving him to foot most of the bill, which ended up being around $2,000. Finn came to me a bit stressed and asked if I could cover the bachelor party expenses since I had some money set aside. I agreed to help him out. I also gave him $1,500 in cash to keep on hand for any emergency situations, just a little extra backup. Cut to the wedding day. There's this tradition at some weddings where they cut the groom's tie and go around to the guests, asking for money, kind of like a fun way to collect a wedding gift on the spot. When it was time for Finn and Marcus to come to our table, Finn decided to use the $1,500 emergency cash I gave him. He thought it would be a cool move to show his support by putting all that cash on Marcus's tie. Everyone was cheering, and it seemed like a fun moment. But inside, I was really not happy that money was meant for actual emergencies, not just as a showy gift at a party. It felt like the money we really needed to keep just in case was used up in a way that wasn't planned. After Finn used the emergency cash at the wedding, things got a bit tense between us. He came back to our table about half an hour later, and I immediately told him that the $1,500 I gave him was meant for real emergencies, not for showing off in front of a crowd. He argued that since the money was from our joint funds, he also had the right to decide how to use it, especially if it was to help a friend like Marcus. I tried to explain that while our shared expenses and emergency funds are indeed for both of us, using that money just to look good in front of others felt wrong to me. I told him that in situations like that, the money felt more like it was mine, and I wanted it back. I reminded him that we had already covered the bachelor party costs, which was more than enough financial support for the wedding. We ended up arguing, and the rest of the week was pretty rough between us. I was firm about wanting the $1,500 back, even though Finn felt like I was being unfair or manipulative, especially since I financially support his studies and he relies on me a lot right now. I knew asking for the money back might seem petty since he doesn't have much to spare, but it was important to me that we use our emergency funds only for real emergencies or at least discuss such big spending decisions together first. Am I the asshole? Now for some comments. Minimum wage here $12,200? I think asking for him to take it back is a bit much. However, I do think he should make it up somehow. Can he sell some belongings or get a part-time job? Not the asshole because your husband is behaving immaturely. He needs to accept that your joint financial situation is not great right now, and you being all right with shouldering more expenses now for long-term joint gain is not a license for him to spend on his buddies like he's still bringing in a good paycheck. In the meantime, stop giving him so much for emergencies. I have a feeling the problem with your husband goes far beyond this. He's living beyond his means, and that spells a ton of future trouble if you do not separate your finances now. Not the asshole. But you might want to cut your losses or speak to the groom himself and explain the situation. Even if you didn't intend for that money to be spent that way, asking for a wedding gift back is in bad taste. If you really have to have it back, go to the guy himself. If they're a decent person, they'll understand. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.